Genetically modified organisms, GMOs for short, are designed to produce enzymes that kill insects. Therefore, GMOs contain depopulation poisons in the very structure of the plant, which means they cannot be washed away, like the pesticides applied to crops. The damage they do to insects, they also do to humans, which is why they should never be consumed. To place GMOs outside the scrutiny of science and within existing food regulations, the elder President Bush issued an executive order which ruled that GMO plants and foods are substantially equivalent to ordinary ones of the same variety. The principle of substantial equivalence became the linchpin of the GMO revolution, facilitating total control over food by corporations and governments dedicated to depopulation, and now capable of creating Andromeda strains when and if it suits them. GM crops are grown on 13% of the world's total arable land. The problem is that many countries refuse to label GMOs, and that is of course an intentional political decision to force people to ingest Depop produce and foods. In these countries, consumers have no choice but to restrict themselves to organic produce only. Since 70 to 80% of all processed foods contain GMOs, one should avoid processed foods anywhere on Earth. But in the countries where GM crops represent a large proportion of the total arable land, one should consume only organic produce and meats. These countries are Argentina, where 61% of the total arable land is GM, Brazil, at 58%, the United States at 47%, and Canada at 25%. 4 GM crops account for 99% of worldwide GM crop hectarage: soy 50%, corn 30%, cotton 14%, and canola 5%. Therefore, anything made of soy, corn, cotton seeds, and canola should be avoided unless labeled GMO-free. Other GM plants are eggplants, created to sterilize the people of Bangladesh; bananas and sweet potatoes, created to sterilize the people of Africa; potatoes, papayas, zucchini, squash, apples, alfalfa, and sugar beets. Some 17 million farmers in 29 countries grew GM crops in 2011, in the following order of magnitude: the United States, Brazil, Argentina, India, Canada, China, Paraguay, Pakistan, South Africa, Uruguay, Bolivia, Australia, the Philippines, Myanmar, Burkina Faso, Mexico, and Spain. 50% of all GM crops are currently grown outside the US. While GM crops are fast replacing traditional or heirloom crops, the industry is controlled by only 4 American and 2 European corporate giants: Monsanto, Dow, DuPont, Cargill, Syngenta, and Bayer, of which Monsanto is by far the most dominant, with a 90% share of the US transgenic seed market. More alarmingly, the same players have acquired control of half the world's seed producers in only 5 years, and are sole manufacturers and patent holders of the fertilizers and proprietary herbicides GM crops require. The global monopoly and rapid market share expansion of these 6 US and European-owned companies was made possible with strong political, legislative, and judicial support. That GMOs are a depopulation weapon is rather easy to demonstrate. I have identified 25 indicators to this effect. 1. GMOs have spread incomprehensibly fast considering the bitter opposition from the public and scientists. 2. Are subject to proprietary laws and are enforced by patents that are patently absurd and cannot be legally justified, but have nevertheless been defended in court again and again. 3. Make no economic sense as they force farmers to buy seeds that they previously saved from their own stock. 4. Create absolute dependence on overseas corporations not just for seeds but also fertilizers and proprietary herbicides, leading to absolute loss of national sovereignty and individual choice. 5. Are owned and controlled by only 6 corporations, of which Monsanto has by far the largest share of the market, making for a very vulnerable market that could be easily destabilized by natural or man-made causes, which is an unacceptable risk to global food security. 6. Are worse, no better, or only marginally better than natural seeds, depending on the crop. 7. Deplete and degrade the soil much faster than traditional plants. 8. Owe their success to political support in the US and to legal maneuvering at the World Trade Organization, whose patent rules were written by the biotech giants themselves and whose rulings are industry-friendly and ignore consumer demand and national sovereignty. 9. Violate biosafety protocol. 10. They alone are exempt from labeling in the US and Canada and other countries to deprive consumers of choice. 11. Their damaging effects on human health and the environment are kept secret by preventing independent research. 12. Restrictions on research force regulators to make crucial decisions based solely on research sponsored and approved by the patent-owning corporations, who have an absolute stranglehold on scientific research and the flow of scientific information. 13. Scientists have complained that they are prevented from doing research for the public good by technology and stewardship agreements that give seed companies veto power over their research. 14. Scientists who try to publish research that shows the harmful effects of GMOs are sued, fired, discredited, deprived of funding, or forced into early retirement, ignored by the media, threatened, intimidated, and bankrupted. 15. Scientists who publish research that praise GMOs are funded, promoted, and given media attention. 16. Research incontestably shows that GMOs inhibit growth, damage internal organs, cause infertility and abnormalities, damage the immune system, and cause structural changes in the white blood cells that make animals more vulnerable to infections and disease, and put them at greater risk of cancer. 17. Research incontestably shows that the proprietary pesticides used on GM crops cause genotoxic and cytotoxic effects, which are a prelude to cancer, birth defects, and reproductive problems. 18. The industry is funded and promoted by known eugenicists and is viewed by the US government as a weapon against the developing world. 19. Irreversibly contaminate traditional crops and destroy biodiversity. 20. Have bankrupted and displaced millions of farmers from their land in the US, Brazil, Argentina, Africa, India, and elsewhere, contributing to widespread unemployment at a time when employment is supposedly the highest priority on the agenda of governments. 21. Has driven tens of thousands of farmers to suicide in India. 22. Command astronomical prices for seeds and herbicides that harm farmers financially. 23. Have caused more lawsuits and backlash than any other industry, despite their exclusive protections under the law and massive global PR propaganda. 24. Have skewed legislation to favor their spread, destroy the organic food industry, deprive consumers of choice, and fully industrialize food production. And 25. Have forced all countries to accept a medley of new biotech patents covering genes, cell lines, organisms, and living processes that turn life into commodities. Are we to believe that these paradoxical and irrational developments in relation to food are simply the accidental results of market forces and the drive for profit, when they in fact are responsible for far more economic loss than gain once employment, social health, health in general, genetic and environmental factors are considered? No market force is strong enough to skew society, damage universal well-being, and threaten life in such fundamental ways. The reason for their success can therefore only be attributed to a cause important enough to justify the horrendous price we're all paying. And that cause is a global effort at the highest level of international governance to use food as a weapon against people and reduce the population in ways that allow governments to blame prices, drought, crop failure, and market conditions for the mass murder and genetic downgrading of their own citizens. No other explanation fits the bill, for no other objective could have coalesced governments and the global elite in common purpose to dare commit global genocide and risk being lynched by the multitudes they have scheduled for extermination. Stay away from any and all GMOs. They are depopulation poisons.